There we go. All right. Well, today the focus will be on looking at the next assignment together and discussing a few details in preparation for that assignment. Of course, we're still focusing our attention now on the prophetic genre, the most difficult one, in my opinion, to study for a number of reasons, as we talked about when we met together. But one of the difficulties is the mixture of genres that we see with prophecy. The other one is just the prophecies themselves are sometimes very difficult to understand. And I just want to remind you, and I'll probably repeat myself as we go along, but as you know, as I tend to do, but just want to remind you that, when we do interpret prophecies, future events, that we always need to attach and recognize the message, the sermon in which those future events are revealed. And that's the most important thing, is to first understand what is the purpose of the future. What's the purpose that the prophet is revealing the future? How does it fit to his message to his present day hearers, right? We always remember that it's the author, or in this case, the prophet, his message to his audience is of first importance, because that's where we will gain the best understanding of that message. And so when he delivers a message and then he includes in that message future events, we want to understand how those future events tie into his message. Now, sometimes his message simply is just primarily speaking of the future, but still there's always a purpose and a reason, a context in which he's doing that. And so today we're going to be reviewing assignment 4.10. That assignment is the background context of the book. And understanding that background context will help us in knowing what it is that has brought about what is behind the prophet's message, what prompted him to preach that message. And so, as I mentioned in class, I think a really good illustration would be parables, where they are message, they're a particular short story that is given to illustrate a theological truth, but parables are always prompted by some occasion, meaning some situation, maybe what somebody said or what somebody did, or even in a couple of cases, what somebody thought, in regards to the Pharisees. In parables, Jesus spoke against them. But there was always a reason behind the parable, an occasion, and that knowing that occasion, that background, helps us to understand the meaning of the parable. It's the same with the prophetic passages as well, that there's a context there, that if we know that context, if we understand what the background is, what the situation is, we understand the author's flow of thought, that then helps us to know at least the purpose of the vision or the future event. We may not know all the details of that event clearly, and that's where people, argue about it. But at least if we can identify the general event itself, but how it ties into the prophet's message to his hearers. All right, that will then give us helpful insight into even the meaning of and interpreting the event itself. So the first step in that process of understanding the context is again looking at the background of the book. This is nothing new. This is exactly what we've done with epistles, what we've done with narratives, what we've done with poetic books, even the Psalms. We were trying to figure out the background context of each psalm as well, right? Who wrote it? When did he write it? To whom did he write it? What situation prompted its writing? All of those things are exactly what we're going to do now as we looked at the prophetic text. And it all starts with looking at the background context, okay? So we won't be covering anything new or unknown here, all right? At least hopefully it doesn't seem new to you, but because we've done it already a few times, but it's always good to go back and refresh and remember what the details are. And each time we do that, I think we gain a little better understanding of the process and what we're looking for. So if you remember, we're going to review basically the purpose of our time this morning is to go over the specifics of the next assignment. And a couple of you guys have gotten started working on your assignments, which is great. I want to encourage all of you guys to do that. Christmas is coming, and I know when it gets near Christmas time, it's going to be difficult to work on assignments. I know you'll have many ministry responsibilities and family responsibilities, and that's perfectly fine. But we still have a few weeks before that comes. So I want you to take advantage of that and be working on these assignments. And that's why I'm going through reviewing them with you to hopefully help encourage you to be working on them. And then also too, to address any questions you might have. And then also, when you do want to start, when you work on each assignment, you'll have a video which will give you some of the details for that assignment in case you have any questions, okay? And so with that, I want to take a quick reminder of the background context of a book, what we're looking for, and then we'll use Obadiah as our example and work on that together a little bit. And then I'll take a look at with you at the assignment just to go over that briefly, okay? So that's the plan for us. And then anytime, if you have a question or comment, please don't hesitate to interrupt me or get my attention, all right? Now with that, so we're looking at the background context. And again, remember, these first 3 steps are focused on the book as a whole. So last time we met, when we looked at the assignment 4.9, it was to read and observe the book. So that first assignment, you're reading the whole book of Zechariah, making observations of the whole book. And you can go to our last session to get the details. In this assignment, in this session today, we're looking at the background context again of the book. All right. We want to understand what's the background for the entire book. And when we look at background context, we're looking at the author, the recipients, again, the historical context, the culture, the geography, social context, that is the names mentioned, and then the occasion for the writing. All of these things should bring us to an understanding of what was it that prompted the prophet to preach. What prompted him to give these messages and then compile them within a book. And if you'll remember this table, it's in your syllabus and also will be in the session notes from this morning. This table just gives several questions for each particular topic that we're looking for in the background context. And again, you don't have to answer all these questions for every part, but they're meant as to give you a guide and to help direct you into certain things to be looking for in the book. And of course, the main category is the author or the prophet. All right. What circumstances does he seem to be preaching in? What does he say about himself? What's his tone? What do we know about this prophet? Some of the prophets, we have a lot of information. Some of the prophets, very little, right? But the idea is just trying to find out not just who it is, but what do we know about him? And what does he say within the book, either about himself, his situation, or even, what is his tone? And then secondly, we want to consider who are the recipients. And remember, there could be 2 groups, the group that's being preached to, and then also the group being written to. Sometimes they're one and the same group. Sometimes it's hard to tell. Now, of course, with every prophet, every prophet is either a prophet of Israel or Judah, right? So it's likely that we can at least assume that the audience being written to is the people of Israel, either specifically the people of Judah or the people of the 10 northern tribes, or sometimes both. Now, sometimes there's a message being delivered about another nation or group of people. Can you think of any examples of that? Any examples where a prophet is giving prophecy about someone else besides Judah or Israel? Anybody?
Jonah.
Okay, Jonah. Yeah, he was sent to the Ninevites, right? But was his book written for the Ninevites?
No.
No,
For
not likely, right? What's that, Kaso?
Written for,
Sorry, go ahead.
written for Israel.
I think so. It certainly was a story about the Ninevites, and even Jonah's message in the book was delivered to the Ninevites. And certainly they are a main subject of the story, but I think the story was really written for likely, the people of Israel. And the message that God wants them to show compassion on the lost as God does. Can you think of any other prophetic books that are direct messages to nations other than Israel or Judah?
The book of Zechariah is against also Edom and other countries, Egypt.
Yeah, Zechariah has a few messages for other nations toward the end of his book. Can you guys think of anyone else? Any other prophet, that is?
Isaiah also?
Yes. Isaiah has several chapters, right? And Isaiah are directed to the Moabites, the Babylonians, the Assyrians,
Egypt.
the Egyptians.
The nations.
Yeah.
Yes, to the nations.
Sorry, Noor, Egypt too. But
yeah.
what about Nahum? You remember Nahum's book? Who is his message directed to or about?
Nineveh.
Yeah, Nineveh, the Ninevites later, probably 100, 150 years after Jonah. So we see many of the prophets may deliver messages about other nations, or even deliver messages to other nations in a sense, prophetically, but the books are written and the messages are given to the people of Israel. All right, so you have to keep that in mind. But sometimes, often a book may have a message directed towards another nation, but the intended audience that is receiving that message is often the people of Judah, the people of Israel. All right. So keep that in mind as you go through the background of the book. Another element of the background context is the social context, and all that means is who are the names of the people or perhaps even nations mentioned in the book. What names do you see there? So like in Jonah, we see Jonah, of course, and we see the Ninevites or the Assyrians. You could even throw in the sailors, but we really don't know where they're from, so it'd be hard to know much about them except that they were idol worshipers, pagan worshipers. But yeah, specifically, anyone, there's specific names that you see in the book. And then, of course, the historical context is, can we identify the time period in which the prophet ministered, and what events or particular events do we can we consider or know about? Do we have an idea of roughly the time period of history? And this is where it can be helpful to study other books, other prophetic books, or other historical books, Kings and Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Daniel. Sometimes the events are also recorded in other prophets. Once in a while, you may see a reference to or a quote from another prophet. I think Jeremiah mentions Micah in his book. And I think, I'm trying to remember, I think one of the prophets quotes from Obadiah or Joel or something. I can't remember exactly. Ezekiel refers to Daniel. Daniel quotes from Jeremiah in Daniel 9. So we do see that there at times the events of Isaiah 38 are also in 2nd Chronicles 32. I can't remember, 31. And then also in 2nd Kings. And so oftentimes we can get some cross information from other books in the Bible that can help us know more about the period. Jonah, right? We have a reference to him in 2nd Kings, was it 14? If I remember right. Speaks of Jonah and gives a little bit about his ministry in the days of Jeroboam II. So that's helpful. That gives us an idea of maybe some of the historical events that were taking place in the days of when the prophet ministered. Any comments or questions on that? Okay. So, geographical, and this is an important feature to keep in mind. Often their locations are mentioned in the book, particular cities or nations or regions. So you're going to want to understand what those places are. And most importantly, what did the original audience understand about those locations? I think we went through an example in class where we were looking at, I think, an example from Amos where he was talking about go to Gilead and multiply transgressions, go to Bethel, right, and increase your sins. And it was important to recognize those two locations were actually places of worship at that time period. And so that would have been a very shocking statement to the original hearers, to the original audience, to go to those sacred places and commit evil and sin. And so knowing some details about those places and again, what the audience understood about those places is very important. I think we also talked about the cows of Bashan, if you remember the region of Bashan. So here the geographical can be very important to understand what do we know about those particular places mentioned in the book. Okay. Cultural issues or practices. That's important. Like if you're reading the book of Jonah and you see this practice of putting sackcloth and ashes. Well, what is the significance of that? What did that mean in that culture? Or, you know, the practice of putting hooks in someone's nose during when you're being conquered. You know, what is that talking about? Or slavery, or there could be a number of cultural issues. You know, in Ruth, the taking off of the sandal at the city gate to make an agreement. These are all cultural practices that will be important to understand when you're studying the book, okay? And then one that we didn't spend a lot of time on in class, but I think it's important to note here, the theological context. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, part of it is what are the what are the theological beliefs of the in that particular culture? So, for example, if you're studying Isaiah or Hosea, it talks a lot about idol worship there, right? And they're committing adultery with their worshiping of other idols. So, it'd be important to understand what was the theological practices, the religious practices of the people at the time that the prophet ministered. Also, too, it's important to identify any references or allusions or connections to the key covenants in the Old Testament. All right. This is something I didn't spend a lot of time on in class, so sort of ran out of time, but look for, as you're going through the book, do you see any references to or connections to the Mosaic covenant or the Davidic covenant or the Abrahamic? Often they are there, all right? So particularly the Mosaic, right? Because that's what the prophets, their primary focus was on the people needing to keep the law, keep the covenant with that God had made with them at Mount Sinai. So look for any references in the book to those things, all right? Or if you see any, you should see several references to the Davidic covenant in books, right? Is there any connection to the Messiah, right? He's linked to the Davidic covenant, isn't he? And so keep in mind, take a look for those kinds of things, all right? Questions on that? Okay. And then finally, of course, and really the point of looking at the background context is the last one here, the occasion, and that is see if you can identify what has prompted the prophet to preach. What has prompted him to give these particular messages in the book? What events, what situation? Sometimes it's just God, like in Jonah's case, right? God wanted Jonah to go because God wanted wanted him to proclaim a message so that he could show mercy if the people would respond. So in that case, it was just simply God told Jonah to go to Nineveh. That's the occasion that prompted, because God wanted to show compassion on the lost. All right, but other books, identify what has brought about the writing of the book or the preaching of the prophet. Joel, for example, right? He was prompted by the locust plague, and so he got up and spoke in response to that plague. Or there's usually an occasion that's prompted the preaching of these guys. So this is what you really want to find out as you're looking at the background context. Okay. All right. So that's just a brief overview. These are the categories that we're wanting to look for when we consider the background context. And so what I wanted to do at this point was just do a little bit of this, practice a little bit on Obadiah. We obviously don't have time to do a full analysis, but just I wanted us to go through this book for a few minutes and take into account some of these elements of the background context, and just by way of again, practicing. So to do that, I want to have us read through the book. We'll start with Brother Alex, if you could read the first paragraph section here, 1 to 4, and then Kazot 5 to 8. And then Bridio, if you could read 9 to 12. Brother Arn, 13 to 16. And then Alan, if you could read 17 to 19. And then Noor, if you can see it okay, can you read the last two verses there, 20 and 21? All right. Okay, Alex, you want to go ahead and start us off here?
Thank you, Pastor Tim.
Thank you.
Obadiah 1 to 4. The vision of Obadiah, thus says the Lord concerning Edom. We have heard a report from the Lord, and an envoy has been sent among the nations, saying, Arise and let us go against her for battle. Behold, I will make you small among the nations. You are greatly despised. The arrogance of your heart has deceived you. You who live in the clefts of the rock, in the loftiness of your dwelling place, who say in your heart, Who will bring me down to earth? Though you build high like the eagle, though you set your nest among the stars, from there I will bring you down, declares the Lord.
Kazo, I think you're up next. Can you read that?
Yes, verses 5 to 8. If thieves came to you, if robbers by night, oh, how you will be ruined. Would they not steal only until they had enough? If grape gatherers came to you, would they not leave some gleanings? Oh, how Esau will be ransacked, and his hidden treasure searched out. All the men allied with you will send you forth to the border, and the men at peace with you will deceive you and overpower you. They who eat you bread will set an ambush for you. Will I not on that day, declares the Lord, destroy wise men from Edom and understanding from the mountain of Esau?
Okay. Verse 9 to 12. Then your mighty men will be dismayed, O Teman, so that everyone may cut off from the mountain of Esau by slaughter. Because of violence to your brother Jacob, you will be covered with shame, and you will be cut off forever. On the day that you stood aloof, on the day that strangers carried off his wealth, and foreigners entered his gates and cast lots for Jerusalem. You too were as one of them. Do not gloat over your brother's day, the day of his misfortune, and do not rejoice over the sons of Judah in the day of their destruction. Yes, do not boast in the day of their distress.
Verses 13 to 16. Do not enter the gate of my people in the day of their disaster. Yes, you do not gloat over their calamity in the day of their disaster, and do not loot with their wealth in the day of their disaster. Do not stand on the fork of the road to cut down their fugitives, and do not imprison their survivors in the day of their distress. For the day of the Lord draws near on all the nations. As you have done, it will be done to you. Your dealings will return on your own head, because just as you drank on my holy mountain, all nations will drink continually. They will drink and swallow and become as if they had never existed.
Verse 17 to 19. But on Mount Zion, there will be those who escape, and it will be holy, and the house of Jacob will possess their possessions. Then the house of Jacob will be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame. But the house of Esau will be a stubble, and they will set them on fire and consume them, so that there will be no survivor of the house of Esau. For the Lord has spoken. Then those of the Negev will possess the mountain of Esau, and those of the Shephelah, the Philistine plain, also possess the territory of Ephraim and the territory of Samaria, and Benjamin will possess Gilead.
And the exile of this host of the sons of Israel who were among the Canaanites as far as Zarephath, and the exile of Jerusalem who are in Sepharad will possess the cities of the Negim. The deliverance will ascend Mount Zion to judge the mountain of Esau, and the kingdom will be the Lord's. The Lord's.
All right. Okay, good. Okay, so let's see. How about we do this? So as you're going through, of course, we're going to first, we begin with the author, right? And want to ask ourselves, who, can we identify who the author is? And in this case, can we do that? Here, let's.
Yes, it's Obadiah in
Yeah.
verse 1.
From verse 1, right? Here, let me do this. Okay, there we go. So I got the whole screen there for you. Yeah, Obadiah, right? Now, question is there anything in the book itself? Do we learn anything about Obadiah within the book?
No.
No. All we have is just his name.
Yeah.
And so we say, okay, well, one thing, at least can we identify maybe his tone? What seems to be his tone in the book? And in the last, if you remember the last assignment, when you do the reading and observation, that's one thing that we already look for is his tone. So here, we just reiterate or restate that. What appears to be his tone?
Judgment, sir.
Yeah, judgment, right? Rebuke.
Rebuke.
Where do we see that?
I think verse 1 to.
Yeah, if we go all the way, verses 1, 2, 3, this is all rebuke, right?
Yep.
Judgment, all the way through, even to verse up to 16, right? So we could say tone is rebuke and judgment. Now, but beyond that then, how might we find out? Is there any way we could find out information about who this Obadiah might be? What could we do?
The date or the time where he lived and where he prophesied.
Yeah, but how could we find that out?
By the places he mentioned.
Okay, so we have Edom's mentioned, of course, and Jerusalem, and then at the end there's a bunch of places here, right?
Judah, Zion.
Okay, so possibly that. One thing we could also do here. Let me pull this over. Can you guys see my Bible Hub here?
Yes.
Can you guys see that on the screen? Okay. So if I go do this, go to Obadiah, if I can find it. All right. And then if I hit topical, you see where I'm at there? Topical.
Yes.
Hit that. And this is a helpful way to sort of shortcut a little bit, but it's perfectly fine to do, is do the topical, and then all the names and the places are pulled up where you can go and look and see where these other names or these places are used. All right, like cross-reference. All right. So, for example, here's Obadiah. So I'm just going to hit that and see. Are there any other Obadiahs? Are there any Obadiahs mentioned in the Bible? Okay. And I go, oh, actually, there's quite a few. 21 occurrences. So there's a lot of Obadiah. So what I would do is then just go through these passages and just see, okay, here's one Obadiah in 1 Kings 18. Actually, you can see several. Can you guys see that? Maybe I'll increase the, right? There's an Obadiah in 1 Kings 18. If you remember, he's the Obadiah who hid the prophets from Jezebel. Okay, so he lived in the days of Ahab and Jezebel. 1 Kings 8, see all these references to Kings. Now there's another Obadiah mentioned in 1 Chronicles 3. Okay, and then there's another Obadiah mentioned in 1 Chronicles 7. And then in 8. And then in 9. All right, there's several Obadiahs mentioned in Chronicles. Okay, then there's an Obadiah mentioned in Ezra, in Nehemiah. And then finally, of course, the book of Obadiah. So there's several. I think if you look at all the references, if I remember correctly, there's like 10 or 11 of them, which honestly, guys, makes sense because the name Obadiah means servant of Yahweh. It's from the verb or the noun eved, servant, and Yah, servant of Yahweh. So that would be a fairly common name. So the question is, you'd have to go through and sort of look at each of those passages and see, now, do any of these, could they possibly be the Obadiah of this prophecy of Obadiah? All right. And so that's something you'd have to then take a look at and consider. And I don't think any of those would fit, but this is the process you would go through. Okay. So what I determined, I had a few here considerations when I looked at it, and these are just a few notes that I did. There were the Obadiahs that I saw in the Old Testament. There's the Obadiah, I mentioned him already. So I looked at those verses. There's an Obadiah who was one of Jehoshaphat's officials who could have been alive. This guy's one possibility that I noticed, and I'll explain why that is later. Another Obadiah who was a foreman supervising the remodel of the temple, and then all these references to Obadiahs in Chronicles and Ezra and Nehemiah. Okay, there's a lot of them. But nothing else is said about the author in the book of Obadiah, because the whole book is just focused on his message about the Edomites and God's judgment. Okay, so sometimes what you will find, guys, is you'll do some research and then you may have some possibilities, but you may have to look at some other things to, like when you mentioned Noor, understanding the time period so we may have to study the historical background first to figure out, is one of those Obadiahs a possibility? Okay. So this, when you're doing this, you're doing a lot of fact finding. You're looking for a lot of information. And sometimes you may have to keep looking before you can get some idea. All right. So we may have to go through the author. We get some information on different guys named Obadiah. And then we have to, okay, I've got that. I don't know who it is at this point, but I know about these Obadiahs. Now, let me take a look at the next steps, and then maybe that will help me to understand which Obadiah this might be, or it might not be any of them. Okay, that's the conclusion I came to when I studied it. This Obadiah is just another one in the Old Testament that's not mentioned anywhere else. So there is one slight possibility of the guy in the days of Jehoram. Okay, but so what I do is, as I mentioned there, I might just go to to Bible Hub, and that'll give me information on different references. Okay, notice here, in fact, as you can see on your screen there, on the left column, the Bible Hub from the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia. Okay, you guys see that? The ISBE, very helpful reference resource. And it mentions, notice how many they had, 13 Obadiahs. It identifies. And I don't know if he says, yeah, he doesn't indicate if any of these are the actual prophet Obadiah from the book. Okay. But at least, you know, he gives a reference to all the different ones. So there's quite a few. It's a common name. All right. But this is the process you would go through, is that I recommend anyway, is you want to see where else is this person mentioned in the Bible. Here's another one that BibleHub.com has, Easton's Bible Dictionary. It also has all the references. All right. And it's important to look those up. All right. Don't just cut and paste and go on to the next. You want to do this study on your own. Try to understand. So try to be careful with that. When you use a resource, be careful that you don't just copy from the resource without doing your own work, as we have discussed several times. Okay. So this is all just from different Bible dictionaries from BibleHub.com resource. Questions on that? And as you know, sometimes the identifying the specific author, sometimes we're just not given a lot of details about the author, right? Because in some cases, it's not considered, you know, by the Holy Spirit to be that important to know much about the author. All right. Sometimes the focus is really on the message. And that's fine, you know, but we just want to try to understand and study and learn as much as we can. But in some cases, we may not find much information about it, and that's okay. But we want to at least take time and to try to do that. So the second thing we're looking at is, you know, first the author, and then secondly, the audience. That is, who are the recipients? Again, who is being preached to, and perhaps who's the audience being written to? So as we look at this book of Obadiah, who would you say the audience is?
Israel.
I think it's Israel. It's a message about Edom, right?
Yeah.
So we might note that the message is about Edom. But notice at the end of the book, God speaks of on Mount Zion, it will be holy. The house of Jacob will possess, house of Jacob will be a fire. The house of Joseph will be a flame. The exiles of this host of the sons of Israel will possess the cities of the Negev. So he speaks about these promises to Israel, doesn't he, within the book? And so even though the message is about Edom, I think the audience is Israel, or it could be Judah. We don't know for sure, both. Okay? We don't know exactly at this point, but the message is about Edom. So they would be maybe the audience being preached to. Okay, that's where the message is directed towards them. But the audience being written to, I think, is the people of Israel, because again, this Obadiah is a prophet of Israel. He receives a vision from the Lord regarding Edom, but I think the message is intended. You know, he wrote it down for the people of Israel to have. Okay, and so then you would want to consider, you know, we want to identify, okay, since the message is about Edom, right? Where do we see that again? How do we know it's about Edom?
Verse.
Which verse?
Verse 1.
Yeah, right away. See that? Okay, so verse 1 tells us it's concerning Edom. So what's one question that we're going to have to answer? What's one thing we're going to need to study? For sure. Since the message is about Edom, we need to know what?
The circumstances.
Okay. And to do that, we're going to need to first understand, okay, well, who is Edom? What do we know about Edom? So again, I would say
Esau.
What's that?
Esau, pastor.
Descendants of Esau.
Yeah.
Brother of
Yeah,
the twin
Esau
brothers.
also. We'll get to him in the social context. But since the message is directed towards the Edomites, we certainly need to understand, well, who are these guys? Just like when in the book of Jonah, it mentions the focus is the message is to the Ninevites. So we need to know about who are these guys. Well, again, I would refer us to the Obadiah. Just go to and here we have places. We have Edom, right? So let's look up Edom. Okay, that's a location. Edom's mentioned a bunch of places here. And then there's a summary on the right from, oh, it doesn't say what encyclopedia they used. But Edom or the Edomites, you can look here and it's got sort of a summary of them. And so what you would do is do a study of, look at Edom. Where is it located? And what do we know about these people? Okay. And part of that's geography. I understand that. But also we need to understand the people of Edom or Edom. What do we know about them? And I gathered a few things just as we look at, we can get much from the book, right? As well. What is the author, what does Obadiah say about the Edomites just in this book? What do we know about them? Anybody?
They
The
live
arrogance
in
of their hearts.
mountains.
Arrogant.
Okay, first let me start with Alec. What did you
Verse
say, Alec?
3.
They live in cleft rocks. Verse
Okay.
3.
Verse 3. So they live in the cliffs or clefts of the rock.
Clefts of rock.
High dwelling places. Okay, good.
High
Arn,
dwelling.
what did you say?
The arrogance of their hearts.
Yes. Verse 3, right? They are arrogant.
Okay. Has deceived the Edomites.
Yep. He's speaking of the Edomites. So they're arrogant, they're proud, right? Who will bring me down to earth? Okay, good. Alan, I think you were saying something as well.
It's the same in verse 3. Arrogant.
Yeah. Okay, good. Again, there's a reference to verse 4, right? To where they live. Verse 4, they build high places. So it appears like they may live amongst in the cliffs or the rocks, which actually archaeologists have found some evidence of that. They actually did build their homes within the cliffs, and it made it very difficult to attack them. But also be very hard to live there, right? I just was thinking, well, I won't say it. I was thinking about the CR, like how would they do that? But anyway, that's. Anything else? Do we know about the Edomites just from what is said about them in the book?
Verses 10 to 14.
Verses 10 to 14?
Yeah.
They were very violent towards.
Yes. Verses 10 to 14, they committed violence and brought harm to so there's a lot of things said about them here. And again, what's helpful is he's speaking about the Edomites at the time of Obadiah wrote, because this is things about the specific Edomites in the days of Obadiah. And that's what's most important to consider. Nor, did you have something else?
He mentioned as a brother to the Israelites. When your brother,
He calls them brother, right? Brother Jacob, your brother's day. So verses 10 and what is that? 12. They were referred to as Israel's. Okay, good. So these are all, and again, these are just basically same kinds of things that I had come up with as I was looking at the Edomites. Again, the Edomites are directly addressed, but I think the recipients of the message would also be people of Judah. But then I noted various things that were said about the Edomites within the book. And again, that's the most important source of information will be what can you learn about the audience or who the message is directed to. What can you learn about them from the book itself? Just like as you're studying an epistle and you're looking at, say, the epistle to the Ephesians. What do we know about the Ephesians from the book itself? Or the Philippians or Galatians? Whoever the recipients are, what do we learn about them from the book? And then we could try to learn about them from outside of the book. So if you wanted to look at other passages which mention the Edomites, you could do that again by going back to the Bible encyclopedia here from Bible Hub. It talks about the Edomites and the history of the Edomites as the descendants of Esau. Okay, and you would learn from different passages mentioned here that the Edomites came from Esau. They were descendants of Esau, just like the Israelites were descendants of Jacob. And by the way, what do we know about Jacob and Esau?
They were brothers.
They were twin brothers. That's right. So I'm like, okay. Now that reference to brothers makes a little bit of sense, doesn't it? If the Edomites came from Esau and the Israelites came from Jacob, then both nations begin in the same family with Jacob and Esau, brothers. And we could go back to the account in Genesis where Jacob and Esau meet, and then they go their separate ways, and Esau goes down south, and that becomes the nation of Edom. And if we studied Edom and Esau again, that Edom has the idea of comes from the word meaning ground or dirt, Adam, and Esau comes from the word red. And so this idea of dirt can be seen as brown or red. And so you see the connection between Esau and Edom. So there's this interesting relationship between Israel and Edom that they started out from the two brothers. So there is a a reference to that by Obadiah in his message, and he calls them brothers. Okay, so these would be things that you learn as you study Edom and Edomites and get to know who they are, since they are the focus of this particular message. Questions on that? Obviously, skipping a lot of study here. I'm just sort of giving you the findings, but these would be the kind of things you're going to look for. Like in Zechariah, when you do your assignment, you're going to be looking at, okay, who the audience, what do we know about them?
King Herod was an Edomite pastor.
King Herod came from, he was an Idumean who descended from, the Idumeans descended from the Edomites. So some believe, that Herod was anti-Jewish potentially because of that heritage. But he's the last known Edomite or descendant of Edomites, because that nation is gone. It was wiped out before Herod's days. Yeah, good observation. Okay, any questions about that? So when you're studying Zechariah, you have to take into account, okay, who's the audience, and what do we know about them in that time period? What do we know about their situation? What do we know about their about them and what was going on at that time? What does the author say about them? And for Zechariah, you're going to have a lot of help from Haggai and from Ezra. All right, they're going to be describing the situation of the recipients in that time period. So very important to remember, we have other books in the Bible that you're going to want to include in your study, okay? Because there's going to be a lot of helpful information given in other books. All right. Back to our background context. The next one is the historical background of the book. Now, I mentioned the Facebook message to you, I gave you a few other passages to consider. Obadiah is a very difficult book to identify the date. I think Obadiah and Joel are the most difficult to pinpoint the time that it was took place. Most books, as we discussed together when we were together, most of the prophetic books, they will have an introduction of the time period at the beginning, right? You guys remember that from our class. Don't you remember Hosea, for example? Right? He said, during the days of, and then he mentions these kings. If we go to now Joel, he doesn't mention that. Joel's a lot more difficult to determine. But Amos, in the days of Uzziah, Jeroboam, Jonah, we have Jonah the son of Amittai, so we know from 2 Kings when he lived. Micah, in the days of Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah. Nineveh, Nahum we don't have directly, but there's some clues in the book. The same with Habakkuk, we're not given directly, but there are some clues in the book. Zephaniah, in the days of Josiah. Haggai gives the exact date when he prophesied. Same with Zechariah, he begins with an exact, a month at least. So we can see here, most books, there's usually some direct statement of the time period, but some of the books, like Obadiah and Joel in particular, don't give that. So you have to, then you have to do is look inside of the book, see, is there any clues from in the book that might give me an idea of the time period when Obadiah gave this message? And so you're first going to want to look for that. Now, some books, like I said, may have clues of certain events that took place. Like, for example, if you go to, is it Nahum? And Nahum, we're not told at the beginning when he gave this oracle, but later in the book, it mentions the destruction of Thebes. This is actually Thebes. And it mentions the destruction of Thebes, and we know from an extra biblical literature when this happened. So actually, there's a couple of statements inside of the book that gives us an idea of when the book was written. Same for Habakkuk. Habakkuk doesn't have specific date at the beginning, but if you go in the book, you see that God says he's going to raise up the Chaldeans, the Babylonians. So we know that this book couldn't have been written after the rise of Babylon. It was written just before the rise of Babylon. Okay? So these are just a couple examples of, again, there's really, like, I would say 3 categories here of books for the date. The first category are those books that just state the time period directly in the days of King Hezekiah. Okay? So those are easy to figure out, right? Because you know when the kings, when they existed. Then there's the second category of books, which don't mention the explicit date, but they give events within the book that can help give an idea of when the prophet spoke. That's the second category. The third category is those books like Obadiah and Joel, which don't give specific details that would make it clear when the book was written or when the prophet spoke. They only hint at it. So you have the kind of 3 levels here. The first level is the book that gives the dates explicitly. The second level are the books that speak of events that give us a good idea of when the prophet spoke. The third level are those books that just give some bare hints at certain events that it's still very difficult to pinpoint. Obadiah is one of those books. And when I studied Obadiah, I spent so much time trying to figure out when this guy preached. And there's basically, so as we think about it, what would we look for? What clues are given in the book of Obadiah that might direct us to possibly when Obadiah spoke? Anything you think within the book?
Pastor Tim?
Yeah, Noor.
Verses 10 to 14 again.
Okay, good.
And there might be the reference to 2 Kings 8, 20 to 22.
Okay, yeah. So what do we see here in the book? It's speaking of some event when Edom, right, participated in violence against Israel, but they were not, there was some nation that invaded Israel or Jerusalem, right?
Yeah, and they did not help.
And Edom, one, did not help, but what's even worse is they participated in it, right?
They enjoyed the ransack of Israel.
Yes, right. They rejoiced in the day of their destruction. They gloated. So we have a clue here in the book that says, okay, is there a time in Israel's history when Edom participated in an attack upon Israel by another nation? And there's actually, I think, if I remember correctly, when I studied this book, I think there were 3 occasions. Let me see if I put this in your notes. Yeah, I did. So I put a table together from my study. So I looked at the passages that had those specific events, times when Israel was attacked by a foreign nation and Edom participated in it. So as Noor mentioned, 2 Kings 8 is one such situation. All right, where Edom revolted against Judah because Judah had exerted themselves over Edom. And then what happened was the Philistines, oh, you'd have to go to, sorry, 2 Chronicles here. Yeah, the Philistines and the Arabians came against Judah and invaded it, carried away possessions. And this was at the exact time when Edom was there, when Edom revolted against Judah. So this is one possible reference to the events in Obadiah. Another one is, and that's in the days of Jehoram. Another one that is commonly referred to is after the Babylonian exile, that there was that the Babylonians were the foreign force invading, and there's a reference to Edom, I believe, there. Let me see if that's see that. Okay, so there's a few places that refer to Edom as attacking Israel, and what you want to do is sort of look at those passages, see what the connections are. And again, this is not straightforward. It's not simple. What I landed on was, okay, oh, here we are. Jerusalem was invaded 4 times that we know of in Scripture. One captured by Shishak, another is Jehoash defeated, then the attack of the Philistines and Arabs, and then the rout by Babylon. Those are the 4 occasions where Jerusalem was attacked. And Edom is mentioned in this occasion. And so that's why, one of the reasons I believe that's the most likely occurrence or time period of Obadiah, around 850. But I would not develop strong convictions about that because it's not super clear. All right. But that's the approach you would take. All right. When you're trying to understand the historical context, is it a first level? Is it mentioned explicitly when the prophet preached? If not, okay, I'm going to have to look in the book and see, are there any clues that guide me to, does he make any statements about a particular event or particular nation that can give me an idea of when that prophet spoke? And for Obadiah, there's a few possibilities. But again, that's pretty complicated. And, you know, sometimes you may not get to a point where you can be fully confident. I lean towards 850 BC just because I think the events described in 2 Chronicles 21 and 2 Kings 8 seem to be most aligned with what is said about Edom in Obadiah. But a good case could be made for the Babylonian attack as well. All right. I don't know if that was helpful or not, but any thoughts or questions about that? I'm just trying to give you some insights how you would approach. Now, when you study Zechariah, you're not going to have this problem, guys, right? Praise the Lord, right? Because we know exactly when Zechariah preached. If you do your homework, you look at Ezra 5, look at Haggai, look at Zechariah 1, you know exactly when he prophesied, at least for the first half of the book. The last half's a little more difficult, but you still know roughly what time period it is because, you know, Zechariah lived, you know, a normal lifetime. So, so Zechariah, you have more direct statement from the historical context of the book. So, you know, when Zechariah prophesied, that tells you what was the situation of the people of Israel at that time, what had happened, what do we know about their experiences and their circumstances, okay? But for some books like Obadiah and Joel, trying to figure out the historical context is a little bit more challenging. And I already went through this with Haggai. So you guys, if you were paying attention in class, you had a lot of information on the background context already given to you in your notes. So you can just go back and take a look there and you'll have a lot of information provided because Haggai and Zechariah, their backgrounds are, you know, almost the same. Same audience, same time period. And in fact, they ministered together at the beginning of their ministry. So it shouldn't be, Haggai and Zechariah share a lot of the same background with each other, okay? But if you're studying some books, like I said, you may have to do a lot more digging to try to determine or figure out the time period of the book. All right, questions on that? Okay, yes, I know it's very interesting and riveting, but we need to move on. I know, but you know, honestly, guys, it can be fun when you study and sort of you discover something, you know, even if it's, you know, when a prophet ministered or particular time period. It's always encouraging to, you know, uncover something in your study that, you know, as you investigate on your own. So, okay, let's keep moving because we're running out of time here. So geographical, again, nothing new here as far as how to approach this. And I would suggest again for this, as was, you know, as Noor read, he mentioned in the last few verses there's several locations mentioned here. The Negev, Shephelah, Ephraim, Samaria, Gilead, Zarephath, Sepharad, Mount Zion, right? Of course, Edom and Judah. These are all different locations that you're going to want to make sure, you know, what are these? What is the Negev, the Shephelah? When he says Ephraim and Samaria, what's he referring to? And again, this isn't just like, oh, just, you know, I'm studying geography. How's this going to help? There's a point to this. Why does he mention these specific places? Out of all the cities, all the regions, all the nations that he could have mentioned, why those? Okay, so that's, again, right, that's the key question for the good Bible student, is always asking, why is this here? And so as you look at those locations mentioned in this prophecy, you have to ask, why those? Why didn't he mention like Lachish, you know, or Bethel, or, you know, even, you know, some of the more common places of that time period, Gilead even. He does, I think actually he does mention Gilead if I remember right. But he mentions some of these more obscure places like the Shephelah, the plain of the Philistines, the Negev, Sepharad, where are those places? Why does he mention those? So you're going to want to learn about them in order to interpret what he was saying. And so, again, I think one place that can help save you a little time is going back to a Bible Hub, and notice all the places are mentioned here. You guys see that? Make it a little bigger.
Mount Zion.
Yeah, so there's Mount Zion, there's Negev, Samaria, Shephelah. That's kind of an obscure one. Let's see if we can get anything on that. So it looks like it refers to a valley or a plain. And they have some information there, some passages, so that could be helpful. How about Taman? Where's Taman? It mentions several passages, and we learn actually that Taman was a son of Esau. And it's a location in Edom. I don't know why he's got all these references in Leviticus. But so you learn from looking at these different passages that Taman it's a city in Edom. And here, notice there's a couple references to Taman in Obadiah and also Jeremiah. Let's see here. This ESV. Jeremiah 49, what was the verse? 7. Concerning Edom, is wisdom no more in Taman? That's counsel perished from. So this verse indicates perhaps Taman was known for its wisdom. People there perhaps may have been more wise than, so they may have a reputation for having people that are wise. So anyway, just an example, as you're looking through the different verses, identifying what, oh, sorry, I'm not sure the screen. There we go. Sorry about that. This is what I was showing from Bible Hub. Information on Taman, some of the verses that are used there. Okay. So you would just want to do a study from, all these different locations. And here's a map, by the way, I pulled showing Edom. Edom's down here in the south. See that? And here's Taman, actually. Here's the Negev. And then here's the Philistines on the west coast. So the plains of the Philistines are over here. Gilead is over here. Samaria is here in the north. The Negev in the south. So you notice, as you study each of these places, the Negev's in the south, the Philistines are to the west, Ephraim's to the north, Gilead's to the east, northeast. So he's mentioning places in the 4 directions on the compass, north, south, east, and west. From reference to Jerusalem. So perhaps he's referring to those locations because they represent, going out in each direction, that Jacob will possess the land to the north, to the east, to the south, to the west. Okay? So that's a possibility. Oops. And then here I have another map that shows Gilead, Samaria to the north here, Edom to the south, the Philistine plains to the west. Okay, and here's Jerusalem right in here. Okay. So here's just information that I had for each of those locations. that you would look up on your own. Okay, so that's for the geographical context. Comments or questions on that? I know, this is exciting stuff, isn't it? But it's part of that process. We're trying to understand. So one of the things we got to look for is, okay, what these places that are mentioned, what do we know about them? More importantly, how would the people in the original audience have understood those places? So how would the people of Israel, what would they have known about these locations? So the best we can do is look them up in other passages and see what is said about those places. All right. Okay. Social context. That's the next particular background. So you want to, what names are mentioned in the book? So we already went through that before when we looked at read and make observations. So here we would just maybe again look at Bible Hub and notice, okay, here's people that are mentioned in the book, as well as Esau, Jacob, Joseph, Obadiah. So these are people we could take a look. Here's Taman, right? That's a place, but it also came from person. So we do our study. What do we know about those particular people mentioned? The nations mentioned. We've already talked about Edomites. They came from Esau. And then here are some passages which, notice in Genesis 25, this is a key passage that I found, where you remember that when Esau gave up his birthright for the stew. Remember that? And then it says there, Esau's name was called Edom because he said, give me some of that red stuff. And that comes from the word Edom. And this passage actually tells us Esau was then named Edom or Edom. And then notice in Genesis 32, that Esau lived in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. And then later in Genesis 36, Esau is Edom. So all of this tells us, this study, that Esau is the nation of Edom came from him. Right? Genesis 36. Esau, the father of the Edomites. There it says, tells us directly. And again, that then gives us the insight as to, oh, so this is why Edom's referred to as the brother of Israel, because they came from the two brothers. Okay, and that's just from studying the background of Edom. So, let's see, we'll skip that. Cultural context. Again, look for, what do we look for in this book? How brothers are expected to treat each other. That's a big one in this book that we'd want to understand. Theological context. I'm just kind of rushing here at the end because we have running out of time. But I did notice in a couple things. One is, notice in verses 19 and 20, there does appear to be, I believe, an allusion to the Abrahamic covenant, because it's talking about people of Israel inhabiting, possessing the land. And you remember, what was it that Abraham was promised by God? They would have a land. So I think verses 19 and 20 is a allusion to, indirect reference to the Abrahamic covenant. That God will fulfill a promise to them in this proclamation of judgment against Edom and the nations. And then finally, what prompted the author to preach? Basically, Edom attacked Israel unjustly, prompting God to declare judgment upon Edom. I think that's the simple. Verses 10 to 14 tell us clearly because of violence to your brother Jacob. There it is. That's a direct statement. And then it's expanded upon in the verses after that. But what occasioned, what prompted Obadiah to preach? It was this particular event in Israel's history when the Edomites, instead of protecting Jacob, instead of standing up for Jacob, they actually participated in an attack against them. All right. Any comments on that? Does it make sense? Again, hopefully this is just review. And I know that's Obadiah. You're interested in Zechariah, but it's the same process you're going to go through. And as I said, Haggai was an example that we went through in class, and that's going to help you a lot for this assignment. In fact, why don't we just go to this assignment briefly here. Here it is. Let me do this. All right. This is assignment 4.10. After the read and observation in 4.9, you're going to do this step, the background context. And I gave this example from Obadiah. So here we have all that information I went through just as an example from Obadiah. You don't need to include this on your assignment. In fact, you can just delete all this because what I want to see is just here. I want to see what you find for Zechariah for each of these, the author, the audience, historical context, and again, take note of other passages. I probably should have added here, and even maybe Daniel 5 and 6. All right, so then I just give you a little space and then the table here. So that's all you need to do for Zechariah for assignment 410. Okay. Easy, right? No problem. And it's all the examples on Canvas. So it's all there ready for you. So you can download that and then use it to work on your assignment and then upload it when you're done. Okay, so the first 8 assignments are reading assignments, and then beginning in assignment 4.9, that's the first step, read and observe, and then 4.10 is the background context. All right. Okay. Any comments or thoughts or questions before we break for lunch? Does it make sense, I hope? It should at this point. So again, nothing different than what you've been doing in the previous modules. But sometimes the prophetic ones can be a little bit more of a challenge. Okay. My fire smoke detector just went off. I don't know if you guys can hear that.
No.
Okay, so let's see. Have any other? I didn't have anything else to cover for today. So if there's no questions or anything, I'll ask Brother Allen for you to close us in prayer. But anybody have anything before we finish today?
I appreciate, Pastor Tim, the categories about dating issue. I've noted that.
Okay, good.
Those that stated explicitly the date of the writing, those that give clues or ideas of the time when it was written, those which are difficult to determine the dates, not explicit nor even dropping hints as to the writing.
Yeah, we always hope for the direct ones because those are easiest to figure out, but unfortunately, they're not all like that. Brilio, were you going to say something?
In our assignments, sir, the tone of the passage, the tone. Because in chapter 1 in Zechariah is another tone, and the last part is another tone, and middle is another tone.
Oh, the tone?
Yep. Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
it can change depending on the nature of the message. Just like in the epistles, right? Sometimes you would have, Paul gives these words of encouragement, and then some places in the epistle, it will be a strong, instruction or command.
Then we are going to place all of that in our assignments.
For the tone?
Yep. Yes, sir.
Yeah, you could just note that, like, chapters 1 to 6, the tone is, instructive. Right at the beginning, I think is a tone of rebuke, right? The first few verses in Zechariah. Then it's instruction and encouragement and the visions. And then 7 and 8 is instruction and rebuke again. And then 9 to 14, there's mixture of encouragement, of judgment. So yeah, just note that, in these chapters, this is the tone, these, and then the changes in these chapters, just take note of that.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, good. It's not all one tone in every book, right? Sometimes Galatians is, right? The whole book of Galatians is just, he's upset. But often there, and in Obadiah, there's most of it's the tone of rebuke and judgment. But often there can be different tones. Is there another question somebody had that I heard? Okay, well, next week, Lord willing, we'll take a look at the contextual flow of the book, and I'll have a few comments, hints about Zechariah, just to let you know regarding the assignment. But as I said, why don't you guys get working on start the assignments if you haven't yet, just to, I think it'll help a lot more. Now that we've talked about this assignment, I think you'll find it a lot easier and a lot quicker if you now work on this assignment right away for Zechariah, because then it should be fresh in your minds. I think you'll be able to do it more quickly. If you wait, then maybe some of the things we talked about this morning you may not remember when you're actually doing the assignment. So that would be my recommendation to you. Would be to get working on it this week. And as I said before, if I were you, I would just identify a particular time of the week, give yourself a few hours, whether it's a Monday morning or a Thursday afternoon or Tuesday evening, wherever it is that you have a slot each week, you could dedicate 2 or 3 or 4 hours even to just working on an assignment. If you're consistent with that, doing that each week, you're going to find yourself being able to, you'll finish these assignments. I think you'll find yourself making good progress if you do that. But okay, well, Alan, let me ask if you could close our time in prayer.